The Age of the Imperium. From M31 to the present. The Age of the Imperium is the time period that began with the end of the Horus Heresy in the early 31st millennium, and is typically referred to in the present tense. The approximate time period begins in 14M31 and continues forward to the present, with the last year represented in imperial records before the opening of the Great Rift being 999 M41. This age is generally conveyed as spanning from the end of the Horus Heresy to the narrative present, a period of approximately 10,000 Terran years. It began with the time of rebirth, from circa M31 till M32. During the time of rebirth, the Imperium of Man slowly recovered from the destruction and loss of the Horus Heresy. The myriad wars of the Great Scouring were fought in the years immediately after the end of the heresy and the death of the traitorous War Master. In a lengthy campaign, the Imperium's forces hunted and banished the remaining traitor legions and their allies among the other forces of chaos from the occupation of human space. Eventually, the Chaos Space Marines and the Ruinous Power's other followers found refuge in the massive Eye of Terra Warp Rift. For a time, the Imperium knew peace from the corrupted followers of the Chaos Gods. At the same time, many alien species that had been fought during the Great Crusade reappeared in human space to take advantage of the disruptions caused by the heresy and plague the vulnerable worlds of mankind. In order to prevent a single person from controlling as much military power as Horus had mustered and eliminate the risk of another large-scale civil war, numerous reforms were enacted at the hands of Robert Guillermin in his new capacity as Imperial Regent and Lord Commander of the Imperium to reshape its political and military structure. In this way, the men and women of the Imperium could face the new post-heresy realities of an interstellar government where the Emperor was no longer capable of carrying on the day-to-day tasks of interstellar governance. The Imperial Army was divided into the land-based forces of the Astra Militarum and the space-based forces of the Navis Imperialis, each with a separate chain of command structure and bureaucracy. The remaining 9 loyalist Space Marine legions adopted the Codex Astartes, written by Guillermin, and were split into the many smaller Space Marine chapters of the Second Founding, that were comprised of only 1,000 warriors each, along with their own supporting spacecraft and planetary fiefdoms. The era of imperial peace and reconstruction came to an end when the Orcs rampaged across the Imperium on a massive scale from 544 to 546 M32. The number of green-skinned attacks grew until it became the greatest Orc invasion that the galaxy had ever known, eclipsing even the Orc Warg defeated by the Emperor and Horus during the Ulanor Crusade, which had earned him the title of War Master. Nothing was safe from the Orcs' primal desire to conquer the galaxy, and their widespread advances were only halted when the Imperium resorted to the use of the most extreme measures, at great cost to the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. This conflict was remembered as the War of the Beast, The traumas of this time gave birth to several new institutions of the Inquisition to safeguard humanity in the future from further Xenos assaults. The Inquisition itself was reorganized in the aftermath of the War of the Beast into separate divisions or Ordos, including the Ordo Malleus, to carry on the Inquisition's original mandate to protect the Imperium from the machinations of chaos, and the new Ordo Xenos to defend humanity against assaults by aliens. The Ordo Xenos was further bolstered by the creation of its Chamber Militant, the Death Watch, a new chapter of the Adeptus Astartes comprised of veteran space marines drawn from multiple different chapters. The Byzantine politics of the Imperium took a calamitous turn in 546 M32, in the wake of the War of the Beast, in an event remembered as the Beheading, when the High Lords of Terra, the successors of the Imperium's original Council of Terra that had been established after the heresy to administer the day-to-day affairs of the Imperium in the Emperor's name, were slain to the last individual on the orders of Drakan Vungurich, the Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum. A Space Marine retribution force drawn from the Halo Brethren, Imperial Fists, and Sable Swords chapters tracked the Grand Master to an Assassinorum temple. The commander of the Astartes strike force was assassinated as soon as he made planetfall, but the remaining Battle Brothers carried out the attack without him. Inside the temple, they were attacked by 100 Eversword assassins. Only a single Space Marine, Maximus Thane, the Lord Commander of the Imperium and Chapter Master of the Imperial Fists, survived to reach Grand Master Vungurich and end his life with a bolt pistol. The Imperium ultimately descended into anarchy for a standard century, until new High Lords were chosen following an intervention on Terra by 50 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, led by Ignazio, the Chapter Master of the Ultramarines, who chose 12 new High Lords with his fellow Chapter Masters in a single session of the Senatorum Imperialis. The Forging. From M32 to M35. The Forging is also sometimes known to Imperial historians as the Golden Age of the Imperium. During this period, the Adeptus Terra brought the most important human-settled star systems of the galaxy that had not been reached by the Great Crusade under Imperial control, and expanded the interstellar borders of the Imperium. Internal stability was gained with the establishment of astropath quarks on countless worlds, with major hubs established on the best garrisoned Imperial worlds, including Armageddon, Baka, and Makridge. This allowed a reliable network of interstellar superluminal communication to function, using the power of an astropath's astro-telepathy to send and receive messages across light years. This period also saw a slowing in the gradual decline of the Imperium's technology level from its pre-heresy height, and the growth of the interstellar economy due to the rediscovery of a valuable portion of a standard template construct database from the age of technology in the Kana system as the Imperium expanded. Once more, the Imperium repelled the forces of Chaos renegades, heretics, and aliens alike across the galaxy and reclaimed countless lost and rebellious regions for the human species. The Emperor, always an object of veneration and divine worship since the Great Crusade and the days of the cult of the Lectitio Divinatus, only increased his devoted following of worshippers after being joined to the Golden Throne, which was hailed by his faithful as his ascension from the physical back to the spiritual plane, from whence he would further guide and protect humanity. Many imperial cults dedicated to the worship of the Emperor as the one true god of humanity arose over the following centuries, the majority of which were ultimately repressed, united with or absorbed into a centralized faith known as the Temple of the Savior Emperor. This powerful church gained further momentum among the masses of the imperial faithful until, in the 32nd millennium, it was finally granted the status of the official state religion of the Imperium and the title of Adeptus Ministorum, more often called the Ecclesiarchy by the people of the Empire. It was only a few standard centuries later, in the mid-32nd millennium, that Ecclesiarch Veneris II received a seat amongst the High Lords of Terra, and after 300 standard years, the seat reserved for the state church's governing ecclesiarch was made permanent within the ranks of the Senatorum Imperialis. In 646 M32, Ignazio, the chapter master of the Ultramarines, united over 50 leaders from other chapters of the Adeptus Astartes and arrived upon Terra. Such a show of power and faith put an end to the squabbling for the contentious seats of the High Lords of Terra that had consumed the differing imperial factions since the beheading. In locked council with the mightiest of humanity's warriors, such matters were quickly sorted out. To this day, none know exactly what was done or said, but when the Space Marines departed back to their far-scattered missions, there once again sat 12 High Lords of Terra in the Senatorum Imperialis. If there was further dissension, none dared speak it aloud. In 888 M32, the Imperium was consumed by the event known as the Astropath Wars. Sadly, there is no further information on this conflict available in the Imperial records. In 910 M32, the event known as the Firestorm unfolded, though again, there is no information available. Sometime during the 33rd millennium, the War of the Confessor unfolded when, in a particularly violent display, the Adeptus Ministorum exerted its newfound political strength. Many key shrine worlds were added to its holdings during this first of many wars of faith to come. In 265 M33, Admiral Ursus of the Imperial Navy was cast down by the High Lords of Terra for becoming too ambitious. However, he was still too powerful within the Navis Imperialis to be executed without initiating a costly civil war, so he was instead dispatched on an explorator mission to the intergalactic gulf beyond the Milky Way. For the following solar decade, Ursa's reports reached Terra by astropath, detailing the conquest of new star systems for the Emperor. After 2 solar decades, these reports finally ceased. Contact was never re-established with the star systems Ursa's mentioned in his reports. In 313 M33, the Siege of Eternity's Gate unfolded, though no further information is available. In 615 M33, the Blade of Infinity, a pre-heresy cruiser, emerged from the warp, its re-entry signature suggesting that it had left real space over 20,000 standard years before. This period predated even the warp drive's invention in the age of technology and suggested a radical time stream disorder. Vox transmissions picked up from the vessel suggested that the Blade of Infinity was trying to communicate some type of warning. But before much could be deciphered, the ancient starship disappeared once again into the warp. In its wake arrived an invasion fleet of Chaos Space Marine traitor legions. The arch-enemy of the Imperium wreaked much havoc. The Blade of Infinity re-emerged from the warp several more times in subsequent years, always as a harbinger of further incursions into Imperial space by the forces of chaos from the Imperium. In 831 M33, during what became known as the Year of the Ghosts, the Honored Dead rose up in the Segmentum Solar to drive back the terrors of the war. Sometime during the early years of M34, a great threat to the Imperium arose beyond the ghost stars. Even today, its true nature remains suppressed within Imperial records. The ravages are said to cause the extermination of a score of Space Marine chapters and souls unnumbered. Much of the extant evidence relating to this threat has been censored or purposely destroyed by the Inquisition. But there are contradictory indications which describe the nature of the threat as both a star-spawned plague that swept away scores of worlds and to nightmare engines that slaughtered the populations of whole sectors. This threat is remembered only as the Pale Wasting. In 401 M34, the terrible crisis known as the Howling unfolded. Black Templar Space Marines ended the Catalexis heresy by executing the Cacoddominus, an alien cybernetic psyker whose formidable powers allowed it to psychically control the populace of 1,300 star systems. Unfortunately, its death scream was amplified by the warp and burned out the minds of 1 billion human astropaths, while it also distorted the beacon of the Astronomicon. Millions of starships were lost in the resulting upheaval, and entire sub-sectors of the Imperium slid once more into barbarism without the dictates of the Adeptus Terra to guide them. It is a terrible price to pay for victory. Following a fierce warp storm bursting from the Eye of Terra in 666 M34, the first of many unnatural phenomena known as warp stars are sighted. The tendrils of their power pulled any starships or small planets that fell within their reach to a grisly, if spectacular, doom. In 934 M34 came the warnings of the craft world Ulthwé to the Imperium, though no further records are available as to the nature or content of this warning. Nova Terra Interregnum, from circa mid-M34 to late M35. The Nova Terra Interregnum is also known as the time of the Twin Empires, and was a troubled period in Imperial history when the Imperium of Man fractured for a time into warring factions for over 900 standard years during the mid-34th through the late 35th millennium. During this period, the rebellious Council of Nova Terra dismissed the authority of the High Lords of Terra and claimed separate rule over the Imperium's Segmentum Pacificus. During the dark days of the Interregnum, division and civil war fractured the Imperium into a number of different warring factions. The Adeptus Mechanicus was also affected by division and internal warfare brought about by doctrinal differences and competing centers of power. One of the most discordant of these conflicts was the Moray Schism, which occurred sometime in the 35th millennium, a dogmatic battle between the Martian orthodoxy of the standard cult Mechanicus and a far more radical creed based upon the prophetic writings of a triad of tech mystics from the minor forge world of Moray. This schism was one of the most divisive and widespread doctrinal conflicts to afflict the Adeptus Mechanicus since the Horus Heresy. Moray itself was eventually reduced to a cinder by the Fabricator General of Mars's Rectification Fleet, but not before heretical writings from that world spread like wildfire throughout the priesthood of Mars, the Titan legions, and several Space Marine chapters with close ties to Mars, such as the Iron Hands. Over 2,000 Terran years of bloody strife passed before the baleful doctrine was finally considered purged from the Mechanicus and its allies. After almost a millennium of low-grade civil war and political maneuvering, the Cataclysm of Souls in 975 M35 reunited the Imperium. In that year, the ecclesiarchy tried to transform it into a formal theocracy, where political differences would be submerged by usurping the power of the rest of the High Lords of Terra. Their efforts ended only in stirring up massive religious civil wars against the Council of Nova Terra, who were denounced as heretics who stood in defiance of the will of the God Emperor when they rejected the ecclesiarchy's attempts to increase its power over the imperial state. This religious rebellion on many worlds of the Segmentum Pacificus ultimately overthrew the Council and restored the rule of the High Lords over the entirety of the Imperium's territory, though billions died in these religious wars, and the power of the ecclesiarchy was increased throughout the Imperium to a dangerous level as a result. In 980 M35, the galaxy suffered from the onslaught of the massive Harad Rising. In 991 M35, the 21st founding of the Adeptus Astartes, later known as the Cursed Founding, was raised. This was the largest founding of Space Marine chapters since the second founding, following the Horus Heresy. It had taken place in the 35th millennium, shortly before the start of the Age of Apostasy. Upon the world of Inkulaba, a secret Geno lab was the site of the secret project known as Homo sapiens novus, where Mechanicus Genitors attempted to perfect and remove the existing identified deficiencies in flawed Astartes gene seed, and ultimately begin the production of new and improved Primarch-like Space Marines. But their project was doomed to failure, as the Genitors proved far less skilled in the genetic sciences than the Emperor of Mankind and his ancient scientists. Instead, their efforts resulted in the development of seriously flawed gene seed that was used to craft the organ implants for the new chapters. Worse still, some of these chapters later developed unexpected genetic idiosyncrasies, mutations that strained the tolerance of the Inquisition and threatened the chapter's survival. The most seriously afflicted chapters suffered the wrath of the Grey Knights after they were called in by the Inquisition to expunge the threat. Some escaped this fate and fled, eventually turning traitor and swearing themselves to the service of chaos. In 104 M36, the War of Recovery unfolded when patchy reports of technological wonders on the planets of the Mortuam chain reached Mars, hoping that it might be possible to recover new STC database fragments. The Adeptus Mechanicus launched an expedition which began an escalating war that lasted for over a standard century. Aided by the advanced weaponry they recovered, the forces of the Mechanicus freed the human colonies of the region from Xenos occupation, and several first-generation copies of STC databases concerning certain technologies were returned in triumph to Mars. The Age of Apostasy in M36. Foreshadowed by the deep political divisions of the Nova Terra Interregnum, a new age of dissent and power struggles consumed the Imperium in the 36th millennium. Zeal eclipsed reason, and misrule reigned supreme. The word of the Emperor was subverted wholesale by corrupt ideologues, each struggling to usurp total control of his realm for themselves. This era is known as the Age of Apostasy, a time of brutal imperial civil war and tyrannical repression, and is considered to be one of the bloodiest times within the Imperium's history after the Horus Heresy. Around 200 M36, this age is marked by the Reign of Blood, when the High Lord, Gorge Vanda, an insane tyrant, became both the Ecclesiarch of the Adeptus Ministorum and the Master of the Adeptus Administratum through bribery, blackmail, coercion, and murder. During Vanda's reign of blood, multiple wars of faith were fought as he attempted to gain full political control of the Imperium. The reign of blood lasted for 70 Terran years before a messenger delivered the news that heralded its end. A man named Sebastian Thor and his sect of the Imperial cult, the Confederation of Light, denounced High Lord Vanda as a traitor to the Emperor. The Confederation of Light was the rebirth of an ancient sect of the imperial cult that had once stood as a rival to the temple of the Savior Emperor that became the heart of the Adeptus Ministorum. Its doctrines were more moderate than those of the temple of the Savior Emperor, and promoted a version of the imperial faith that sought individual salvation through faith in the God Emperor and good works in his name, rather than the pursuit of political and material power which had come to define the doctrines of the Orthodox ecclesiarchy. As an accomplished orator, Thor was able to sway billions to his cause, stirring up a galaxy-wide rebellion against Vanda's rule. Eventually, he was besieged on Terra by several Space Marine chapters and Astra Militarum regiments. The Space Marines fleet unleashed a massive orbital bombardment which caught most of the traitors in the open. Gauge Vanda was assassinated by his own bodyguards, the women warriors known as the Brides of the Emperor, who were convinced by the intervention of the Adeptus Custodes themselves that they had been tricked into betraying the Emperor by Vanda. In the aftermath of the Reign of Blood, Sebastian Thor became the new ecclesiarch, and the ecclesiarchy was reformed along the lines of the theology of the Confederation of Light. The Imperium State Church now promised to pursue a more spiritual rather than secular agenda, and maintain a balanced political course in which it shared power with the Adeptus Terra rather than seeking to dominate all within the Emperor's realm. Some resistance among believers in the old temple of the Savior Emperor, Orthodoxy, remained, and these individuals went on to form a hidden resistance to the reformed imperial creed known as the Temple Tendency. The Brides of the Emperor were transformed into the Sisterhood of the Adepta Sororitas, and its orders militant, the Sisters of Battle, became the armed forces of the ecclesiarchy and the chamber militant of the Inquisition's new-formed Ordo Hereticus. The Ordo Hereticus was intended to root out the internal enemies of the Imperium, watch over the ecclesiarchy, and prevent the emergence of another Gauge Vanda, who sought to serve his own selfish ends rather than the will of the Emperor. The event known as the Plague of Unbelief in 310 M36 is also considered part of the Age of Apostasy of the 36th millennium, although it occurred several solar decades after High Lord Gauge Vanda's death and Sebastian Thor's ascension to the position of ecclesiarch. Many false prophets appeared throughout the anarchic age of apostasy, some little more than madmen leading rebel armies, others spiritual demagogues who commanded entire worlds and sector-spanning armies. The most powerful of these was the apostate cardinal of Gathalamor, Bucharest, whose heresies reached such proportions they became known as the Plague of Unbelief, not to be confused with the Curse of Unbelief, a potent arcane disease spread by servants of the Chaos God Nurgle in the 41st millennium, and better known as the Zombie Plague. The Plague of Unbelief came to an end after the heroic sacrifices of the imperial saint known as the Great Confessor, Dolan Kyriosius, who willingly martyred himself on Gathalamor. Curiosius's example proved so potent a display of faith in the God Emperor that the entire population of the world rose up and cast down Bucharest, restoring imperial rule and the orthodox faith of the God Emperor. In 754 M36, the Imperium was struck by the web of intrigue disaster, though there is no further information. In 989 M36, as the Eye of Terra and other warp rifts visibly expanded, the tech priests servicing the Golden Throne demanded an increase in the number of psykers needed to fuel the Emperor's growing appetite to successfully power the Astronomicon. The Black Ships increased their number and frequency of their voyages to collect their types of psykers from across the Imperium. According to some records, from this time onwards, 4 times the number of psykers are sacrificed daily to maintain optimal levels of power to the Golden Throne. The Age of Redemption in circa M37. The Age of Redemption marked the era when the Imperium recovered from the sins of apostasy in a reign of blood and tears. The imperial cult grew in zeal as never before. Heretic pyres burned night and day on 1,000 imperial worlds as its people sought to mortify their sins against the God Emperor through the scourging of the flesh of others. Imperial crusade after imperial crusade was launched by the Space Marines and other imperial military forces to recapture its wealth and push back the hordes of chaos, orcs, and other alien threats to humanity. This religious fervor eventually peaked in an orgy of fanatical devotion to crusading in the Emperor's name, and thousands of worlds were left with inadequate defenses as sector fleets of the Navis Imperialis, Adeptus Astartes chapters, and Astra Militarum regiments were drawn into longer and more terrible redemption crusades spurred on by this religious fanaticism. In 10M37, the wrath of the Chaos Sun fell upon the Imperium when the red giant star at the heart of the Maxill Beta system exploded in an expanding cloud of warp flame. The inhabitants of every world for hundreds of light years were either mutated beyond recognition or possessed by the denizens of the warp. In response, the High Lords of Terra ordered the mobilization of whatever Imperial forces were close at hand. So it is that the Grey Knights were joined by a dozen other chapters, countless Astra Militarum regiments, and the nascent orders militant of the Adepta Sororitas. The resulting battle did much to heal the remaining wounds that had been opened by Gauge Van Dyer's treachery. In 20M37, the High Lords of Terra, in their mercy, began a systematic and deadly purge within the ranks of the Adeptus Terra and on many worlds across the galaxy to ensure that such a corruption of faith as occurred during the Reign of Blood could never happen again. This became known as the Great Call. Among the most devastating of the conflicts unleashed during the Age of Redemption were the Abyssal Crusade and the Occlusiad War. The Abyssal Crusade of 321 M37 began when Saint Basilius found 30 Space Marine chapters wanting in their devotion to the Emperor. The guilty embarked upon a crusade into the Eye of Terra to earn their salvation and purge those human-settled worlds stolen from mankind by the birth of the Dark Prince of Pleasure, Slaanesh. The Ecclesiad of 555 M37 started when the northwestern fringe of the galaxy was ravaged by the heretics known as the Apostles of the Blind King, rogue tech priests who viewed the existence of humanity as an utter affront to the machine god. The Apostles had uncovered wondrous artifacts from the age of technology that made possible the transformation of ordinary stars into supernovae. The constellations of the galaxy were changed forever when they purged the outer segmentum obscurus of human life using these weapons. War raged for a solar decade, until the navigator Joir Macron discovered the palace warship of the Blind King hidden in a fold of the warp. Escaping with this crucial intelligence, Macron guided the Imperial Navy's Emperor-class battleship Dominus Astra to the palace's location. The Blind King was killed, and the genocide ended when the ship's lance batteries pierced the palace warship's hull. Without his physically prescient leadership, the Apostles of the Blind King were swiftly overcome, and their weapons hidden away in the deepest vaults of Mars. In 754 M37, on thousands of planets, menials rebelled against their dreary drudgery, with wild-eyed leaders espousing a better way of life, a galaxy of tolerance. The movement is especially popular amongst the youth of the Imperium, earning it the title of the Children's Crusade. Billions of earnest young pilgrims are lured to seek transport to Holy Terra on pilgrimage. Some are waylaid by pirates, but the majority disappear into the warp. They became known collectively as the Lost Crusade. And in 956 M37, the Heavenfall massacres unfolded, though little else is known about them in Imperial records. The Emergence of the Tau Empire, from M37 to M41. In the late 37th millennium, the humanoid Tau race, located on the arid world of Tau in the Ultima Segmentum, was united under the collectivist ideology of the greater good and underwent rapid technological development and a large expansion outwards into interstellar space, where they established a new interstellar empire and settled many worlds in the eastern fringes of the Milky Way galaxy. The Imperium of Man only came into contact with the Tau Empire in 963 M41, when the Ultramarines clashed with a Tau expeditionary fleet for control of the cursed planet of Malbede. As a result of this late first contact, the number of conflicts between the Imperium and the Tau have been minimal compared to the wars fought between mankind and the other more numerous and widespread interstellar alien species like the Orcs and the Eldar. The rapid expansion of the Tau Empire also caused several other intelligent alien species to be incorporated into its ranks, such as the Kroot and the Vespid. The Waning, from circa M38 till 750 M41. With the Imperium's military forces in every branch utterly exhausted by the Redemption Crusades, star system after star system fell to orc invasion, chaos insurgents, or sheer rebellion. Anarchy throughout many sectors of the Imperium was rife during a dark period in Imperial history that is now called the Waning. Ever more star systems were turned over by the Administratum to direct rule by Space Marine chapters to preserve stability, as only they possess the inviolable military strength required to restore Imperial control in the more lawless regions of the galaxy. Having purged more than 400 worlds within the Eye of Terra, the survivors of the Abyssal Crusade returned to Imperial space in 112 M38, without pausing to claim the honors due for such a successful and protracted crusade. Chapter Master Konvak Lan of the Vorpal Swords declares the now ancient Saint Basilius a false idol, and adoration of him tantamount to betrayal. In less than a standard year, every known sepulchre and shrine dedicated to the false saint is destroyed. After his execution, his bones, along with countless relics, books of doctrine, and thousands of living worshippers, are placed on a derelict bulk freighter and launched directly into a nearby star. During the grim harvest in 666 M38, a great armada of misshapen space hulks drifts out of the warp near Terra. Some of the twisted and fused starships can still be identified as transports carrying pilgrims from the Lost Crusade. The Inquisition works feverishly to cover up the fleet's existence and its cargo of mutant and demon-possessed abominations. In 1M39, the conflict of Helika unfolded. In 103 M39, the Mausolean Cataclysm struck the Imperium. In 131 M39, the Redemption Crusades begin. In each of the segmentae of the Imperium, a great hero emerges. Like unto the Primarchs of old are these warriors, and the combined efforts of their crusades push back the borders of the Imperium further than they have been for nearly 500 standard years. And then, 50 Terran years later, the five heroes vanish without a trace, spurring Ecclesiarch Enovian III to declare them Imperial Saints, return to the Emperor's side. A Black Crusade is the term used to describe a number of mass incursions by Chaos Space Marines and the other forces of Chaos into Imperial space from the Eye of Terra. The most prominent of these are the Black Crusades, led by the Black Legion's War Master of Chaos and Horus's successor as the greatest champion of Chaos Undivided, Abaddon the Despoiler. In 139 M41, the 12th Black Crusade, better known as the Gothic War, was a vast campaign launched by Abaddon that engulfed the Gothic sector of the Segmentum Obscurus after that sector was cut off from Imperial reinforcements and communications by a series of massive warp storms produced by the will of the ruinous powers. The Gothic War consisted of hundreds of planetary invasions and naval battles spanning the time period 139 M41 to 160, and only ended when Abaddon and his Chaos Space Marines, renegade chapters, demonic hosts, and rebellious Chaos cults were forced to retreat into the Imperium with the arrival of Imperial reinforcements as the warp storms that provided cover for their invasion finally dissipated just as mysteriously as they had begun. On the Imperial side, dozens of Space Marine chapters, nearly 100 Astra Militarum regiments, and the better part of 3 Titan legions took part, along with every naval vessel the battle fleet Obscurers could muster. The conflict saw the destruction of several planets and 4 of the 6 irreplaceable ancient alien artifacts known as the Black Stone Fortresses, as well as the death of millions, if not billions, of Imperial citizens. Most significantly, the events of the Gothic War revealed the true nature and purpose of the ancient space-borne alien artifacts known to the Imperium as the Black Stone Fortresses, which had been created by the Old Ones to be used against the Necrons, and were capable of destabilizing stars and destroying entire solar systems. Most importantly, Abaddon and the forces of Chaos were able to escape back into the Eye of Terra with 2 of the fortresses, which would return 1,000 standard years later to plague the Imperium at its darkest hour. This period also saw the Macarian Conquest, also called the Macarian Crusade, of 392 to 399 M41, during which Lord Commander Solar Macarius, the Lord of Segmentum Solar, mustered the greatest human army the galaxy had seen since the Great Crusade. In only 7 standard years, he reconquered 1,000 worlds on the western reaches of the Imperium, and his glory carried him into the darkest sectors, places where the Emperor's light had never been known. Upon his death, the whole Imperium wept for the lost commander, but his conquered territories soon collapsed into rivalry and civil war. The Macarian heresy, as this time is now known, lasted for 70 standard years, and was only ended through the combined efforts of 100 Space Marine chapters. In 500 M41, in an event known as the Tears of the Emperor, the Imperium was swept by visions of the Emperor's tears. From backwards feral planets to the most densely populated hive worlds, 1,000,000 versions of the same story are told by holy men, street agitators, shamans, priests, and mystics. Primitives point to storm-filled skies, claiming that the drops falling from them are the tears of their mighty god. Upon ecclesiarchy cardinal worlds, archdeacons to lowly pilgrims claim to have seen statues of the divine emperor shed tears. Chapter masters and hive city urchins alike have visions of the emperor stirring upon his throne, tears running from his empty eye sockets. Although the dreams take myriad forms, all know that the Emperor weeps not for himself, but for the darkening plight of humanity.